Hi there, my name's Andy, and I want to talk to you about this book, Through the Pilgrim Door, by a guy called Michael Volland. And it's a book that I think is worth a read, whoever you are. It's Michael tells his story. In fact, it's a bit of a sequel. His first book, God on the Beach, I'm hoping to do a review of fairly soon. And I think that his book, God on the Beach, is, I think, the best book on mission and evangelism that I've ever read, because it's practical. And it's about a guy who has the same internal feelings that most of us do about sharing our faith. We want people to know Jesus. We want to have those conversations, but we also don't want to be some idiot that sort of forces conversations, that rams things down people's throats, that goes at things like a bull in a china shop, that has all those sort of voices in our head about, am I being pushy? Am I being an idiot? And has all those sort of hang-ups that normal people have. The failure with the book, God on the Beach, in a weird way, is the fact that, knowing Michael, he's gone on to become a vicar, and now he's principal at a theological college. As the beauty of God on the Beach, when I first read it, was, this is a dude who's a bit like me. He's just an ordinary guy who loves Jesus and wants to try and live it out. In fact, he was an ordinary guy who does love Jesus, but also had shared a load of baggage that he talks a little bit about in his first book, God on the Beach. This book is sort of post-college. This is after he's been ordained. He's got a job as what's called a pioneer minister. The idea is he's been given something of a blank canvas to go into Gloucester and to create something new, to engage with people that don't already come to church. The problem is most vicars seem to be ending up in a church with a little group of interesting, should we say interesting, people around them. And often they have a great heart for the community, a great heart for reaching out, but actually they're often quite stuck with a model and a congregation and resources that are make reaching the rest of the community they're in actually quite hard. I remember when I was working for a church in York, and this guy came up to me, a tourist. He was actually English, so you can't even use language as a reason for his confusion. Asked me if this was the second turning on the right, and I laughed and sort of said, "Well, where are you trying to get to?" And we ended up having a bit of a conversation. I was tempted to say, well, I wouldn't start from here, but that point, I wouldn't start from here, is often quite an interesting place. Where do we start from? You know, often the idea that we start from this sort of congregation that maybe isn't equipped or able to do mission, and we're trying to sort of do in-reach that becomes outreach, trying to keep going an old model whilst also trying to reach out and do something new, means that you're sort of juggling and trying to work out how to do something fruitful and effective. Can often be really hard. In fact, you can feel like you're wearing Saul's armor. I don't know if you know the story of Saul giving David his armor. David, the shepherd boy, probably still a young teenager, and Saul puts his whole armor on him to go and fight Goliath, and it just swamps the kid. He can't move, and it's like, I can't do this. I'm going to have to ditch your armor and find a new way of defeating Goliath, which was his slingshot, which obviously was what worked. So often we as clergy, we as Christians, we as whoever, just people who want to make Jesus known, can feel like we're wearing baggage and junk and accumulation and dust of a bygone culture, of other people's stuff, that means that we just can't move. So the idea of pioneer ministers was, and sadly the Church of England does not seem to be doing quite so much investment in this at the moment, is to actually give people freedom to actually look at new places and new thinking about how to share Jesus with those around. Maybe not starting from that place of lots of stuff that actually binds us up and actually keeps us away from talking to actual normal people who don't know Jesus. Interestingly, another thing to just throw in there about the whole idea of Pilgrim Door is he actually ends up at the cathedral, which bizarrely seems like the worst place to end up, but actually, surprisingly, is actually quite a fruitful mix. It gives Michael the freedom to have a community behind him that's praying regularly, to have roles and things to do, a little bit of stuff to do, and a community to belong to, and also an amazing building to have access to, but that's another story. But also the freedom and space with other staff team and other people around him to enable Michael to go out and to just explore what God is doing in his community. But the thing I find amazing about this book, having done something similar in Kingswood, although I was still very much pulled towards the church stuff, I was meant to be, and then they called me minister at large, but actually the church stuff kept on pulling and pulling, and I had to spend most of my time trying to fight against it. In fact, actually, if I'm honest, that's probably what caused, well, quite a lot of pain, really, and probably ended up with me, well, being off sick and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that's a long story. Milton Jones says, what is it that helicopters and churches have in common? They both suck you into the rotors, and there is that truth that actually it's an effort to pull away from the pull that keeps church running, and we need to work out ways of freeing people up to do that which God has called them to. And that's true not just for ministers, that's true for every Christian. I long for a church that says not, can you come and do this, or can you come and do that, or can you come and fill this rota, but say actually, how can we help you to live out your best life in God? How can you be fruitful where God's placed you, with the people God has put around you? How can we enable you to be the person that God wants you to be, to fulfill what God's put inside you, to just be and do that which is you're called to, rather than trying to force somebody into rotas and all the programs and all the stuff. I remember talking to this one lady, an amazing lady, and she said, I became a Christian. I was so excited about God. I went to church, I got signed up for the coffee rota, and I've been on it for 14 years. But I think God's got more for me than coffee. And I was like, oh man, God has so much more for you than coffee. Now, I'm not saying coffee isn't important, because it's great to have a hospitality ministry, blah, 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 blah. But actually, God's call on our lives is bigger than making a cup of Nescafe. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, the Pilgrim Door talks about his struggle. He also talks a little bit about how hard it is to actually have a blank canvas, because actually our identity comes in what we do, and there is something scary and uncomfortable and difficult about not having a clear agenda, not having a clear role, and actually seeking God, saying, God, what are you calling me to do? What does the kingdom of God look like when it's fully realized in this community, in this context? And how are you calling me to do that? Who are the people you're calling around me? Who are the people, both Christians who may be joining us or coming alongside us, and the people who are the people of peace, the people, who actually are interested in finding out and discovering what it means to follow Jesus. The people maybe just the people who want to hang out with you. Who are the mates I've not yet met, if you like? What is God calling? And these are all the various things that Michael struggles with in his book. There were some points in the book, if I'm honest, where as someone trying to do something similar, I got a little bit frustrated. Whereas the beauty of God on the Beach is I could really identify with it. There were some times where he talked about praying and then coming home to an answer phone message or whatever, and it all being sort of God answering prayer and it being amazing. And I have had the experience of God answering prayer, actually. I'm not being pessimistic. But I remember the first time I read this was when I was having a tough time and feeling really on my own and really unsupported. And sometimes when you hear all these victorious stories of Christians who've done really well and God's come through and God's answered this and God's answered that, sometimes it can feel discouraging rather than encouraging. You can sometimes have that cynical voice that says, why does God always seem to come through for other people and not me? The truth is actually God did come through for me, and God did do some wonderful things where I was, and is doing some wonderful things now. But some days it just doesn't feel it. And I think actually it's okay to say that some days it doesn't feel it. There is there is something of that pain there in the book, although maybe actually it can also truncate it a little bit because it's been written as a book, because it's written as a curacy. The accuracy by nature is short. I was in Kingswood for 8 years, and then that's short too, really. But sometimes we are called to be into tough and hard and difficult contexts for a long time. One of the stories I find deeply inspiring is the story of Jackie Pullinger, who was in the walled city, and she was there for 7 years before the first person became a Christian. Would I have lasted 7 years if I saw no fruit? I don't know. I could easily have given up. In fact, very easy to give up, isn't it? but she didn't. And actually she's now birthed an amazing ministry. That thing of actually 3 years, 4 years, you know, and then you're out of your curacy, that's a different thing from saying, actually, I've invested everything I've got in this. Recently we had an interview from my friend Pastor Benson, who literally was told by his senior pastor that he was going to plant a church in Bristol, and Pastor Benson was called to sell up, buy a house in Bristol, move his life and family to Bristol, and to just plant a church. And actually there was no plan B. That was his call. I guess he's in his 40s, and it was that idea that this is it now, for not for the rest of your life, but you know, this is the foreseeable. This isn't just a short-term thing until either you get another job, either to your curacy ends, or the Church of England pulls your finance or your funding. This is almost saying, you know, a bit like the early missionaries, I've come and I'm here, not just temporarily, not just on a curacy, not just on a short-term thing, but I'm here to stay. I was challenged by the story of the Church Missionary Society when they first sent missionaries abroad, and they were cool, and they used to pack up all their belongings in a coffin to make that prophetic symbol of they were going, and they were going to stay because they weren't coming back. That idea that actually is great, Michael's book, but the fact that it's in a curacy maybe feels like, for those of us who read it, who are in a different place, saying, I'm here to stay. Maybe you feel like you're here to stay. I mean, where I was in Kingswood, there are people who've lived in Kingswood all their lives and will probably stay in Kingswood all their lives. You know, maybe we need books that are saying, actually, I'm here to stay. I'm here to stay. This isn't a curacy. This is the long term. Also, by the fact that he was a minister, he was ordained and commissioned, which I think is a big thing, because some of us, you know, I've stepped away from the vicaring thing. What is it now I've not got the collar? What is it now that I've not got that, all the baggage that goes with being a vicar? I'm still a child of God, and I still have the same authority as a child of God, because actually the call on my life remains a call on my life. I'm called to share Jesus. I'm called to live out my faith. Matthew 28 and Matthew 25 are still something I'm called to live in community. And actually sometimes as Christians we feel like, oh, can I actually do this? Am I allowed to do this? It's one of those things that often stops us and holds us back. But actually it shouldn't. We should be Christians and say, yeah, let's go for it. Whatever you call, let's go for it. Let's try and serve God faithfully with others. There's also lots of humour here. Interestingly, too, in his book, he also shares about starting something that actually goes in the cathedral. It's interesting, isn't it? This idea of a fresh expression of doing something different actually isn't different in many ways. It's almost going back to a bygone era. It's actually still using a religious building. Sometimes it's interesting that what God calls us to do doesn't always look radically different. Sometimes, you know, if we're prepared to say, God, I'll go wherever, sometimes, you know, it isn't always about being new, being sexy, having a flashy name, doing something radically different. Actually, it's about being faithful in however it looks. And maybe too, we'll find that actually sometimes what we need to do is what works for the people we're journeying with. When we launched our church, All Souls, in Bristol, we had it was called All Souls, and the people in the community wanted it to be a proper church that met on Sunday without a bloody silly name. That was one of the feedbacks we had. So we deliberately chose an Anglican-y sounding name. We put the Church of England logo on our flyer because that's who we were. And you know, I said I'm the vicar at All Souls, and you know, and for them it felt like they had a vicar. It was a different thing, and yeah, it wasn't how I was expecting to do it or how I'd have chosen to do it. But yeah, actually, it's what the people of that community needed. Am I prepared to say I will surrender whatever in order to let the people of this community hear about Jesus? I come with baggage. I've grown up in inherited church. I have ways of doing things. I've been trained in an Anglican theological college, so I've got ingrained habits that maybe are quite strongly there. Something Michael challenges us about, and something I've been challenged about, is not only what do I need to learn to serve Jesus faithfully in this community, but maybe I need to ask, what do I need to unlearn? So a challenge, great book, worth a read, but actually what you need most to do is read it with somebody else and have a chat and say, how does some of this stuff work in my context? I'll read. This sort of summed up how I felt when I arrived in Kingswood. He had no team, no building, and hardly any money. Just a trust in God and a desire to see what would emerge. Newly trained and ordained Michael Volland jumped at the chance to start a fresh expression of church in a city centre. He went to Gloucester. And there we have his story, Through the Pilgrim Door. Worth a read, but read it with somebody else and have a chat. Because I think this book is great. But if it's just a bit of information, it's just a story. Really, it needs some unpacking and some contextualisation. But I do love it. And a really good sequel to God on the Beach, which I'm going to hopefully review soon.